I'm making this recording because my grandchildren and great-grandchildren are always asking, what did you and Beverly do as twins that were really fun? I'd like you to tell me some of the stories, the fun things that you do. I was born in Morgan, Utah, to William and Cecilia Francis Knight Francis. My mother lived in Salt Lake and was the youngest of her family, and she married fairly late in life because she stayed home and took care of her ailing mother and all her sisters. When they had their children, Mother was there to assist them. And so she was a little older than most people when she got married. And she met Daddy at her sister's house, Aunt Lil, and after a while they got to know each other really well, and they were married in the Salt Lake Temple, and they had 9 children. First, I'll tell you a little bit about my father. He was the first child to be born in Morgan in a tent in the dead of winter, and people were kind enough to let them live in their potato cellar, until they found a home to live in. My dad was always a very active member of the church, and he filled a 3-year mission in Holland, which he did such a wonderful job that after many years he still heard from the Dutch people, and any Dutch people who lived in Morgan, he was always asked to speak at their funerals, and he could speak fluent Dutch. And I'm very proud of the things that Daddy accomplished. He was very active in the city. He was on the city council and had a very normal life. He was a very good ball player. He could do somersaults, and at the games he would turn somersaults, and he was a small person and very, very energetic, and always turning somersaults at the ball games, and a very fun person. I remember when we were young, Daddy would sit down to read the paper and always went to sleep, and Beverly would get on one side and me on the other, and we would comb his beautiful curly hair, and he didn't wake up. He just slept through us giving him a going over, I guess. Daddy and Mother had 7 other children, mostly grown. So this was a big surprise when she found out she was expecting. And she was really surprised when the doctor said, "Oh no, there's 2." And Barbara was born first, and then Beverly. And Beverly, the doctor was ready to leave, and Mother said, "I'm still having pains. Would you please wait?" And he said, "Oh, my dear, there's another one." And Beverly always said, "They just about forgot me." And my mom at this time was 49, and Daddy was 65. So this was a real surprise to not only Daddy and Mother, but to everybody in the family. And they said, "Oh dear, poor Mrs. Francis, twins at her age." I can remember when my mother rocked me, one Beverly in one arm and me in the other, and she would rock us to sleep every night. And she sang, "It's a long, long trail a winding into the land of my dreams, where a nightingale is singing and the bright moon beams." And I'll never forget that song, and I must have been about a few months old. It was really a blessing to have a twin sister. I always had a best friend. And growing up with Beverly, we did many fun things, and I'm going to share some of those stories with you so that you can have as much fun listening to our stories as we did them. Daddy was so pleased and proud to think the Lord blessed him with twins after having 7 other children, and he would walk into church, Mother said, with one baby under each arm, as proud as a peacock. And being he had a real friendship with George Albert Smith. When he was in our home, he knew we had our twins. He asked Daddy, he said, "Will, I would feel a real honor and a privilege if you would allow me to bless the twins." And so he did. We were blessed by George Albert Smith. And I think that is a real wonderful thing. Maybe that's why we're such good kids. Most times, teachers did not know which one they had in their class, so they would try to put one on each side or put us in different classes. And many times when we had a test and I did very well on the test, Beverly would say, "Well, maybe you could go in for me and take the test for me, and so we'll both get 100. And so we did this many times, and I'm sure some of the kids in our school recognized that it could tell us apart, but the teachers seemed to have a lot of trouble telling which one they had. Carl was my oldest brother and very good looking, but he did not marry because he felt Daddy could not raise such a large family all by himself. And our teachers were kind of on the old maid type teachers, and they would send notes home with us asking Carl if he would please escort them to the Golden Green Ball. And we received many of these notes to take to Carl, and on the way home we just threw them in the ditch. And I don't know why we were so mischievous, but that sounded really fun to us. And so we thought, how are we going to get back at these teachers? And so we went to the show at the Opera House, and we noticed that our teachers were just maybe a half a block behind us. And so we decided to hide down in the lucerne patch. And when they came by, we said, an eagle flew from north to south with old Lady Augustin in her mouth. When she found she was a fool, they dropped her here to teach the school. And we knew they wouldn't recognize who that was, but the next day we were called in her room, and she said, I just want you kids to say that you love me and I will let you go. And I said, I'll say that I love you, but I don't. Beverly was at the church and the photographer was taking pictures of Beverly in her wedding dress and Gordon, and I walked by while he was talking to another fellow, and he said, Beverly, why did you go change your clothes? I'm not through taking pictures. And I said, well, I'm not Beverly. And he said, now come on. He did not know that Beverly had a twin sister. And these kind of things happened really often in our life, and I'd have to say, especially if there was a licking coming up and I was going to get into trouble, I would always say, well, I'm not Beverly. I'm not Barbara. And many times someone would stop the car at the side of the road and say, I just wonder, Beverly, would you like to go over town with us and just have a Pepsi? And I said, I'll bet you think that I'm Beverly. And they said, yes. And I said, I'm Barbara. And so they would drive off. Many times we were mistaken for each other. Well, one of our jobs was cleaning the eggs, and you had to scrape them with a razor blade and then wipe them with a wet rag. And we did this almost every day, but sometimes we would get into a little bit of an argument and we started throwing eggs. And my neighbor said that many times we would see one of us run out and a bucket after us. So we didn't always. And Daddy said that because we did such a good job in helping them clean the eggs, that we could have all the cracked eggs, the money from the cracked eggs, and go to the store and buy petty goods or anything we wanted. And so we kind of outsmarted our parents. We decided there aren't very many cracked eggs, so maybe we'll crack a few. So we cracked a few eggs, and we each had a dozen eggs, and most of them had been good eggs, but we just cracked them a little. And Roy Francis, the owner of the store, told Daddy that I think that your children are not only bringing the cracked eggs, but I think they're cracking good eggs so they'll get more money. And sure enough, that's what we were doing. Once again, we were a little mischievous, and when Mother would always dress us up really cute and send us to Sunday school every Sunday morning. And we remembered that we only had to look at each other and we would start giggling, and we usually ended out in the hall. So on our way, we cut through the barnyard, and Beverly said, maybe we should just stay here and have fun. So we took off our Sunday clothes and played on the rafters in the barn and swung from rafter to rafter and having a wonderful time. And all of a sudden we looked down toward the church, and we could see that the church was out and people were coming home. So we hurried and shook off the hay and cleaned ourselves up a little and put back on our Sunday clothes, and went over, and Mother greeted us at the door, and she said, "What nice little girls. Thank you so much for going to Sunday school." And I thought, that wasn't too nice of a thing to do, was it? And we were always thinking of something to do. Well, when you grow peas, you load them at night, because you have to be over the pea vinery by 6 o'clock in the morning. And so Daddy loaded up his whole load of peas and on a rack, and he put them out in front of our house. And I noticed that everybody that was going to the dance at Como stopped and took an armful of peas off our load of peas. So we decided to take a tub up on top and fill it full of water, a bucket at a time. And so the next people that come, we decided we're going to throw water on them. And so, of course, I had to jump down and keep filling the water can on top of the pea load, and I almost cut my finger off it was a large tin that you undid it with a key. And I just held it tight and climbed back up on the pea load. And the next person that come, the couple were dressed to go to the ball. And we threw a bucket of water down on them. And I think that was not very nice, but it was certainly fun. We were about almost a mile from Como, and we loved to swim. I think they used to call us the Francis Ducks. And Mr. Heiner was at the window taking your tickets and selling swimsuits and so forth. And he said, I have to sit and watch, because they would get on the high diving board and then get up on the side of the railing and then jump to the diving board and do a swan dive. And he said, I was so nervous that they would be hurt, but they always did scary things. And we could swim from one end of that big pool to the other end underwater. We learned to be very good little swimmers. Next thing that I thought was pretty funny, it was time for us to be baptized, and they baptized us in the inside pool at Como, and there were steps there, and the bishop was with Daddy, and he said, maybe, Will, you should baptize them, because I'm sure you know them apart, and I don't. So anyway, he baptized me, Beverly, and baptized Beverly, Barbara. And we decided between us that we don't want to embarrass our dear Dad, so we just won't say anything, and maybe we'll just let the Lord figure this one out. However, we did start giggling, and they said, your dad did not baptize you the right names. And finally, they decided they had to baptize us all over. Daddy set us such a good example of forgiveness. We had people in back of us. We had a lane that went back of our barn, and there was a lady that was, we would say, of ill repute, but she lived upon the corner, and she would send her children with a wagon when it got almost dark, and take a sack of onions, a sack of carrots, and a sack of potatoes. And I said, Daddy, why do you let them get away with that? They're stealing off us, and they're letting their horses eat at our haystack every night. And he said, well, if they steal off us, then they must be hungry. So from then on, every fall, I can remember Daddy dropping off a sack of potatoes and a sack of onions and carrots, and they didn't steal off us anymore. But we always had a good time. We would follow our mother cat all over the place trying to find out where she was going to have her kittens. And as sure as we found the place and were playing with the kittens, we'd go back and she had moved them to another place. And we just always had kittens and puppies and little chickens, and we even had a batch of little piglets. And I don't know of a more fun life than my twin sister and I had. I always had a best friend and someone to be with every day. That's why it's so hard for me to spend much time alone. I always want to be with someone to talk to, because I always had someone with me, and that was my twin sister, who has been a blessing to me, and I love her dearly, and we are still best of friends, and she has been so good to me, and I hope that I have been good to her. And I think the Lord gave me more blessings. I don't know how I could earn all the blessings that He gave me while here upon the earth. Our little puppy we had named Spot, and Beverly and I liked to sneak her in bed with us. And Mother opened the door and said, do you have that dog in bed with you? And we said, no. And the minute the door closed, the dog, he held as still as a mouse while Mother was talking. And as soon as she closed the door, he just started licking our faces and running and playing. And it seemed like we were always into something. And I can remember our uncle brought us a big 5-pound thing of candy, and we loved candy. And but we always were smart enough to take the candy from the bottom layer. So Mother went in and said, you kids, thank you for not eating all the candy. The whole box is full of candy, but she opened the bottom and most all the candy was gone on the bottom layer. We had a friend that was on the corner just before we just on our way to school. And her name was Willa Forrest, and she was about our age, and we played often with her. But she always had Shirley Temple dresses, and our clothes were all homemade, which were very nice. Mother was a very good seamstress, and she always dressed us very cute. Well, we were on our way to Sunday school, and Willa had her Easter dress on and an Easter hat, and we were also dressed really cute. But she said to Beverly, she said, "Ha ha ha, I have an Easter hat and you don't." So immediately Beverly grabbed her hat off her head and threw it in the ditch, and then she said, "And now you don't have an Easter hat either." I had an uncle that lived down the street from us, Uncle Arl, and they were so kind to us because we had old Bolly, and we always rode together. We had no saddle, but we'd get up to a fence pole and help each other up on the horse. And that morning, I couldn't catch. Old Bolly would just circle me, and it really scared me because he had his ears back, and I thought we were going to get hurt. And Daddy says, "You've got to let him know who's boss, and he'll let you put that saddle on." And I said, "He knows who's boss." And finally Daddy came and put the bridle on Bolly, and many times during the week we would get on our horse and visit everybody in town. Everybody knew who we were. And when we went to Uncle Arl's, his boy came out and he says, "Well, here's the Gold Dust Twins." And always invite us in, and was always so kind to us. He either called us Pete and Repeat or the Gold Dust Twins. He always had a name for us, and he was one of our favorite uncles. And another time, we were always thinking of things that we could entertain ourselves, and Rulon had a car, but he had to go over and milk the cows, and it was across the bridge and about a half a block away. So we timed how long it took him to go over, milk the cows, and come home. And we thought this would be a fun time to take a ride in the car, because there wasn't much traffic on our road. So we got in the car, and I drove and Beverly shifted, and we went for a nice ride up to Como and back, and we thought, well, it's time for Rulon to be coming home. So we drove in the backyard, and sure enough, here comes Rulon across the bridge with a bucket of milk in both arms. And Beverly said, "What are we going to do? He will beat the tar out of us." And so Beverly said, "Let's wait until he gets closer to us, and then we'll just let the car roll and we'll run." And so that's what we did, and we ran and hid upon the roof of the garage and laid flat as a pancake, and until it was dark, and we were getting frightened being up there all by ourselves in the dark. So finally, after we knew Rulon had gone to bed, we got down. We were always getting into trouble, it seemed. Anyway, my brother was sitting over in Stort's one day, and the fellow next to him, he says, "Speaking of those twins," he said, "I love 'em dearly, but they just about tipped over my whole pea load." And I think that's where you got that dent in your fender that you can't figure out how it got there. And the other thing that happened when we were in high school, Beverly had a steady boyfriend, and he came to the door on a Saturday night, and he said, "Well, how would you like to go to the show and go have a Pepsi over at the drugstore after?" And I said, "Well, sure." And thinking that, well, maybe he was tired of Beverly and wanted to take me. And so when we were over in front of the drugstore, wouldn't you know, here come the bus from Ogden, and Beverly got off. And I started to snicker, and he said, "You aren't Beverly, are you?" And that was very funny, I thought. When we were 13, we got a job at the Arsenal in Ogden. And this way we earned all the money for really nice clothes to go to school. And we packed gun barrels. It was during the wartime, and it was very hard work. The prisoners of war would put the gun barrels in boiling hot oil, and then we had gloves on and they had gloves, and we took the greasy gun barrels to the women who were sitting at desks, and they would wrap them in very heavy wax paper, very heavy, and prepare them for shipping to the war zone. And we did this for 8 hours a day. And at our lunch hour, we would go in and to the restroom and lay down on the floor and go to sleep, and they had to come and wake us up because we left home at 5 o'clock in the morning, and we were more tired than we were hungry. I first met Dad at Como, but Beverly, his husband Gordon, and my husband came home from the Navy at the same time, and we were Beverly and Gordon was at a dance at Como, and Dad came up and he says, "This is Beverly," and wanted to introduce Beverly to my husband Gus, and he says, "Boy, I wish there was another one like that at home." And Gordon says, "Well, there is." So that was how we met. And he came down, and from that time we went together for about 2 years while he went to BYU and got his master's degree. And I stayed home for a while and took care of my sister, who had just had a baby. And Lloyd finally found an apartment, not very nice, but it was a place, and we decided to get married on about a Monday, and my family had to get everything organized, and we just had a wedding reception in the Relief Society room at our church. And we were married in the Salt Lake Temple, and the only ones who went with us was Lloyd's bishop and his wife. And we didn't have money to go on a honeymoon, so we just stayed overnight at the Hotel Utah and then caught a bus to Morgan and walked from our little town, a street, used to call it where all the stores are, and we walked over to my mother's house, and that was our honeymoon. Well, Lloyd was going to finishing his schooling at the BYU. I worked up at the Capitol, and one day I just got disgusted with our lady manager, and so I quit, and I called Gus up and was crying, and he says, well, I found a place that we could live down here. Let's just get married this weekend. And so we did. We went through the Salt Lake Temple and moved to Provo in a little yellow house right across from the lower campus. It was, you had to walk 15 steps up to our apartment, and a married couple lived across the hall, and we shared the bathroom. It was not the greatest first house that I ever lived in. When we moved to Provo, I got a little tired of being in the apartment while Lloyd was to school, so he had me model in the art class, and I was modeled, and I had to sit still for one whole hour. And the best pictures that were drawn of me was not my husband's. The best pictures were the others, and they turned out to be very good. But we were paid a certain amount of money, and then I thought, well, I guess I'm not a model. So I went down to Cress's and got a job at Cress's, and I had fun because it was young kids, and I worked there for about 2 years, and then we finally got into Wymount, which is very nice and clean, and we were so happy to be in a nice place. And I guess we lived there for a couple of years, and then we bought a home in Orem, just above Geneva. And it was really nice, but no air conditioning, so after 11 o'clock, you were glad to go somewhere else. After that, we had Carolyn and Michael by that time, and I remember sending Carolyn to school, and she came. She had to walk clear up the road above Geneva to go to school, and I sent her to school and didn't notice that she put on her coat over her petticoat, and the teacher sent her back to finish getting dressed, and she was just crying her little eyes out. She was so embarrassed to think that she went to school without her skirt. And we went to the Art Linkletter show, and when we went to Hollywood, we thought, well, we're in California, we should go see a show. So we went to the Art Linkletter show, and it was really fun. And he said, I'm going to tell something, and when I stop, I'm going to read some names, and when I stop, the next person will win a sewing machine. And lo and behold, he read the names and stopped, and he says, the next person is Barbara Gustaveson, and she will win a Necky sewing machine. And so that was one lucky day. what was so interesting is that Gus went to California and had to work for a few weeks. And at that time in Santa Clara, there were all kinds of new homes being built. And he says, when I find something, I will come and get you. And so we were both in Santa Clara, and he says, I'm going to show you a lot of homes, so you could pick out the one that you like best. And we looked at many, many homes. They were all just beautiful. But I picked the one on Prune Ridge Avenue, and I said, oh, this is the one I want. This is it. This is perfect. And Gus says, well, I hate to tell you this, but this is the one that I have already put a payment down on. While we were in Santa Clara, it was the best life, I think, best part of our life. We were so happy there. Daddy was a bishop and then made stake president, and we often had the general authorities to our home for dinner. And of course, after they went to bed, I stayed up and got most of the dinner ready. And they thought, oh, she is so organized. But I was a little nervous, but I found out that the general authorities are very nice and easy to talk to people. And that was a real joy to our family to have the general authorities in our home. And I taught, I guess, Beehive every class that you could name. When I moved to Santa Clara, Lloyd was bishop first and then stake president, and I was taught the beehives, seagulls, and also the laurels. And I had a wonderful time. I enjoyed the young people, and they had fun with me. But I learned as much or more than the kids did. And it's like the old saying, you can't help a child up the hill without getting most of the way there yourself. And so I learned much about the gospel from teaching all the classes that I taught. And then I was called to be Relief Society president. And it was really funny because the first day that we came to the ward, I bore my testimony, and I think it's the first time I ever stood up and bore my testimony. And one of the people on the stand said that the bishop leaned over to his counselor and said, that is my next Relief Society president. And I thought that was really funny. And so I had many wonderful experiences while I was Relief Society president. And it was the most rewarding thing I think that I have ever done. And the first person that I had to help was Gloria, and she had 2 children, but she and her husband were divorcing because he was always threatening her, and they're not a very good marriage. And when we got through packing and getting everything ready for her to go back east to her mother, she said, "One thing, Barbara, would you mind taking my husband's guns and putting them in the trunk of your car so that he can't hurt us?" And so I put him in the trunk of my car and covered him with a blanket and put him way, way back in the trunk. And just forgot completely about ever having them there. But my bishop told me later that almost every day he sat down at his desk, the Lord come to him and said, "You need to talk to your Relief Society president because she has concealed weapons in her car." And he said it happened 2 or 3 times. And I thought, I can't believe that my Relief Society president would have concealed weapons in her car. But finally I decided that I better listen to what the Lord had to say. So he came down and got me out of my meeting and said, "Barbara, I hate to ask you this because it just can't be true, but the Lord came to me and said that you had concealed weapons in your car." And I said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. That happened 6 months ago." And when I was moving Gloria out of her home to go to her mother, she asked me to if I would mind putting the guns in my trunk, that she was nervous about her husband hurting them. And so I put them in my trunk and just totally forgot about it. I learned a valuable lesson that our Heavenly Father guides our bishops. And when a bishop receives a message from Heavenly Father, he needs to follow through. And how wonderful it is that our Heavenly Father is the head of His church and always guides and directs the leaders. I did have some sad things that taught me that Heavenly Father doesn't give you more than you can bear. And He always holds you in His arms and sees you through bad times. And I learned this when my little daughter Janet was born, and she got infection in her navel, and it turned into peritonitis. And that is sores all inside your stomach and out because they gave her the whole span of antibiotics. I heard the doctor say, "Give her the whole span of antibiotics because she can't make it anyway." And so when they told me that she didn't it was going to be very difficult for a child 3 weeks old to get over peritonitis. But that little baby, I never left her for a week, and I just laid my head on the bed, and that little baby held my finger, and I don't think she ever let go of my finger. And I asked Heavenly Father, I said, "Please don't take my little baby. Please don't let me keep my little Janet. Don't take her from me." And I guess I begged and pleaded so much that she did finally, after a terrible, terrible year, get over peritonitis. And my bishop in Southern California called me and said, Barbara, you didn't know this, but Janet was a special spirit who was a perfect spirit and did not have to live out this life. And that's why she was being taken home as a baby. But I didn't know this, or maybe I wouldn't have begged so hard to keep her when it wasn't Heavenly Father's plan at all. When she was 18, I had her till she was 18, and after many years, she just got as healthy, and was the head gymnast at her high school, and just the most active, beautiful girl you can imagine. But when she was 18, she and her two girls that she had been cheerleaders with, they called her and asked her to go to the ball game, and she said, "No, I don't want to go. I don't want to go." And Gus said, "You know, they always go whenever you call. You should go with them." But she didn't want to go, and now I know why. When they got out of the car, and when they were walking toward the curb in front of the high school, this boy, 30 years old, ran them down, and they all three hit their heads on the curb. And he was just a poor little guy that had just been raised on the riverbank and made his car out of parts he found on the riverbank. And this little old lady had raised him to be 30 years old, but he was on drugs, and it wasn't the first time that he ran into people. And they, of course, took him to jail, and they come and said, "Do you want to come to court?" And I said, "No, I don't want to hate anyone. I don't want to ever see him or judge him, because I do not know all the details." Anyway, Janet, it was a very sad time, and of course everyone in the ward was just wonderful. All the neighbors up the street that weren't members of the church brought big platters of hors d'oeuvres, and we received money for Carolyn and her husband and the family all to come to my house. And also a bag, there was so much given, so much money given that we had plenty to pay everything we needed to pay. And through all this, the Lord was just held me in his arms, and my sister said, "You acted like nothing happened, and you were comforting the people who came because they were crying." And the Lord gave me strength to go through this, and it taught me something, that the Lord always stands by you, and you can count on him to help you through troubles that you have in life. And Carolyn gave me a picture that I have on my wall with Jesus walking through the sand, carrying a person, and the person said, Heavenly Father, you have promised me that you would never leave me, that you would always be with me, and why have you left me? And Jesus said, the reason there is only one set of footprints in the sand is because I am carrying you. And that's the way he did throughout my whole life. When hardships would come, he was always there to support and help me through. And I love the Lord, and I will never forget all the kindness that he has shown me throughout my whole life.
Well, Grandma and I have had a wonderful life together. Our prayers are prayers of thanksgiving that the Lord has allowed us at our advanced ages to still be together with each other in reasonably good health. We've had a long life. Our family is a blessing to us. We're grateful for them for their lives as well. We've had a lot of wonderful experiences. I'm particularly proud of this woman because what she has been and to me, the fact that one thing I remember about Barb, as we were growing up, I knew there would never be a time when I would be embarrassed if I brought somebody home unexpected and find the house not cleaned up. I don't know why that made an impression upon me, but it did. I was always very pleased with the way she would keep our home and our house. Until just recently, when she lost her eyesight, she was a good cook. She was a good seamstress. She was just a wonderful example to others for her generosity and for her life. Been a joy to have been married to her, and I'm grateful to look forward to the eternities with her.
My husband has always been kind and sweet and understanding, and a very good father to our children, and very patient. And I think the thing I'm most proud of is his work in the church. We have always participated in all the functions of the church and held most positions in the church. And Lloyd has been a bishop, a stake president, and when he was ordained a stake president, they gave him a blessing that he would always remember everything that he heard and read. And to this very day, 92 years old, he still remembers everyone's name. And I feel that we have been so blessed, and we're so proud of our family. They have raised their family just as we raised them, and are all active in the church, and we are so happy that we are members of the church, and the gospel is what has made our life what it is. So I still hope we have a few more years together and can enjoy each other's company.